Well, we're on lesson 65. Well, have you ever seen one of these? Oh, one of these. It's a Bible, an Holy Bible. Do you have one of those maybe in your house? Maybe in your parents' house they have it on a bookshelf or maybe sitting on the table, and you can open up and has all the recordings of your family history and everything, and it has really spectacular pictures, like such and such, like old pictures in there. And you can look through these pictures and think, wow, this is pretty spectacular. Here's a picture of Jesus. I love big Bibles like this. But do you ever see anybody carrying one of these to church? Probably not. Although I did once see a little boy carrying it to VBS because he wanted to bring a Bible, and that's the only Bible they had in their house. But that was really sweet. He was only 5 years old. But anyway, this is what we're going to be talking about, is a big, beautiful Bible. But this Bible that we're going to be talking about was actually done by hand, copied by hand, way back in time, like the 800s. Well, let's begin at the beginning of what I'm talking about. You're thinking, well, Marianne, what are you talking about? I'm talking about lesson 65, and it's called the Holy Island of Lindisfarne. Can you say Lindisfarne? It's a holy island. Well, what is this holy island? What makes this island holy anyway? I've never heard of a holy island. You were saying, and I had never either. Well, it's kind of over there by England. In fact, it's kind of the history, we're going through the history of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. You see, Rome, the Roman Empire, which we had been talking, went into England and built roads to England, around England. And remember Bath, and made the big bathhouses and everything? Well, in 400 AD, Rome withdrew from England. So now, the English, whoever's there, were going to be on their own. Well, certain people came in after that, and they were called the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes. And they were mainly pagans. As they came into England, things got a little bit weird there. Of course, they were fighting among each other even. But one thing we knew is that England and Ireland and Wales, and Scotland, they all needed Jesus. But Jesus did touch this island, and that's what we're going to talk about. Well, the bishops. Let's go over the history where we ended off. Bishops. What were bishops? Well, Polycarp was a bishop. They were actually the leaders of each church. That's what they called them back there in the first church. And when Christianity was legal with Constantine, as you remember, the edict, the Edict of Milan basically said that you could be Christians and you weren't going to be persecuted. And that was like in the 300s AD. So the head bishops then turned to a head bishop, the head of everyone, and he was called the Pope in Rome. And Pope means Papa Father. We started calling him Papa Father. Well, it came into the Pope. Underneath the Pope, they needed other people, so they put cardinals. So underneath the Pope were cardinals, and underneath the cardinals were archbishops, and then underneath the archbishops were the bishops, and then there were priests and monks and deacons. Quite a lot of different people in the bureaucracy of the Pope, don't you think? Bureaucracy is the levels of where you would work and lead the people. So, but in Rome, the Pope usually stood in Rome. And they basically said that Peter was the first Pope because Jesus said, on this rock I'll build my church. And I don't know if Peter spent very much time in Rome. I know that they think that he was crucified when he died in Rome, so he probably was there. But we studied Peter, and I'm sure Peter really wasn't into being reverend as the first pope. But that's another story, an argument, of course. So many people didn't want to be under the Pope's authority because there was a lot of political power there, and the government clashed with the kings, and some of the kings controlled the Pope. We go through history. So in the East, we talked about the Western was Rome, and in the Eastern was supposed to be Rome, but it was actually headed as the Byzantine Empire, and was in Constantinople. So we have the East and the West, right, of Rome. We need to know that because the church is divided that way. And so in the East, we had the Byzantine Empire, and they would call the church there the Orthodox. All Orthodox means is correct teaching. And there was the Syrian Orthodox, there was the Russian Orthodox, there was the Greek Orthodox, the Ethiopian Orthodox. There's a lot of different Orthodox, and they didn't really claim to have the Pope as their powerful figure. But as the Pope did, they would call the whole papacy, what they call the papacy, and they would call this whole area in the West Catholicism or Catholics. And all that Catholics, the word means, is universal, because they were saying they were the universal church. So there was this division even in the beginning. And then, of course, which I really get into, is the monks in the monasteries. You know, monks means solitary person, and some were pretty solitary, but most of them were not so solitary. They were bringing the gospel. And we talked about them before. We have actually talked about St. Patrick as he went and evangelized Ireland. So out of Ireland came a lot of evangelists bringing the gospel, a lot of monks that wanted to share the gospel with the world. Usually the monks, though, would devote themselves to a prayer and faith, and some lived alone, and some lived with others together. Usually they lived in a monastery together. And then the women, too, they devoted themselves to God, and they lived in what was called convents. They were called nuns, and they would help the poor and the orphans, and they took in travelers, and they cared for the sick. And both the monks and the nuns would do works of art and play music even. And really, a lot of them became scientists, especially the monks. You can go in history and study that, because they shut themselves away to do this. But a lot of them also did community. They went out to meet the community and to help the community. So now we have that. We have the two legs of the church on both sides, and then we also have the evangelists in the monasteries and the monks. So we're going to be talking about the late 500s. What happened in the late 500s? Pope Gregory I was a pope. He sent an evangelist named Augustine. And not the Augustine we studied. It was a different one. Not the Augustine from Hippo. It's the other one. But also 40 monks went with him. And they came in to evangelize Great Britain, that area that we're talking about, which was England and Ireland and Scotland and Wales. And they went in to tell them about Jesus. Remember, I said they really needed Jesus. The pagans were fighting with each other and killing each other, and it was just totally chaos there. In 597 AD, these 40 monks, they arrived, but they had great success. In fact, in the southeast, King Ethelbert I became a Christian. A pagan king became a Christian, leading all of his people to Jesus. In 634, King Oswald of Northumbria, England, he took over those pagan bands there. He also became a Christian, and he went to the island of Iona in Scotland, and other missionaries came. Island of Iona is very important because the monks actually went on that island and actually lived there and did a lot of made a lot of amazing artwork and everything. We'll talk about that too. 635, there was a monk named Aidan. He was Irish from the St. Patrick's group. Aidan, he came and chose Lindisfarne, remember, that's what we're going to talk about, as an island there. And it's north of England, an island. It's way north of England, near Northumbria. So, yeah, that means north. It's on the western east coast, way up there. And it's where he was spreading the gospel first. But he wanted that to be where the monastery was. Aidan. So you think of Aidan Aidan was a great evangelist. He walked the streets, bringing the gospel wherever he went. He was in love with Jesus. That was Aidan. So Lindisfarne. Oops. A note's here. Lindisfarne, let's talk. Well, now there's a castle there, but the castle wasn't built there then. It was more of a monastery, which was just a building. Now it's a beautiful castle. There's a lighthouse there, but there was a lighthouse way later on. So what was really there? Well, it was founded in 634, and it was a very secluded place, and it was called a tidal island. Well, what is a tidal island? Well, when the tide comes in, it will cover up, and you couldn't walk out to the island. But when the tide went out, you got to hurry up and walk to the island. So it was called one of those natural causeways. Two times a day, the tide would come in and out, and you could walk there. But you better hurry up because the tide might take you out. So that's the kind of island it was. In 676, Monk Cuthbert came to Lindisfarne Island, and he was the bishop, and he was loved and respected. And then in 687, Monk Eadfrith. Say Eadfrith. He's the one we're going to talk about. Eadfrith created the Lindisfarne Gospels. What are they? He was copies of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And beautifully, in an artistic form, he copied each one of those Gospels in 687. It also had illuminated manuscripts, that they light up with candles, or light up in the dark, kind of beautiful artwork. The Lindisfarne Gospels he mainly worked on them on that island. Well, let's talk a little bit about the monk's life. Well, they rose before dawn. They had prayer and worship, eight periods of time of prayer and worship throughout the day. In the meantime, they studied the Bible, and then they had other manual duties like cleaning up and probably, making beds and doing dishes and that kind of stuff, cleaning and fixing things. And the other times they did some science or art, depending on what they were called to do. And some had different duties. Well, Eadfrith, you know what his duty was? It was to copy the scriptures. They didn't have a printing press, so they wanted one of those big Bibles like I had, and they wanted to put it up there and read from it, And so, what they wanted it to be beautiful, artistic. So Eadfrith was an artist, and he worshipped God as he wrote and copied and printed and drew the pictures in there, beautiful pictures. He worked on it for how long? 5 to 10 years. Actually, probably closer to 10 years. And he never finished it before he died. So he had to have someone else finish it. These Gospels are such a work of art. It's unbelievable. The book in itself is 13 and a half inches tall and 9 3/4 inches wide with 259 pages. So it doesn't seem like it's that big, but they were thick pages, of course, because they didn't have paper like we have paper. It had beautiful arches on the pages, and it would begin with a full picture of what the apostle looked like, and the first letter that started would be a big, beautiful, artistic letter, inscripted page, they'd call that. They'd put it in this beautiful light box that was lit by candles, and it was held in that box most of the time. You know what? Eadfrith, he invented the pencil. He actually invented it 400 years before others used it. He had invented these pencils to draw with. Well, this Bible was written in Latin. The monk Jerome had actually translated the New Testament from Greek to Latin. It was called the Latin Vulgate. And the pilgrims came to visit and read in Latin. And those times they read in Latin. In 693, the Vikings raided the English coast. Well, we're going to talk about that in just a minute.